Okay, so the first thing to say is welcome to the Autumn Research Colloquium, September 2020. The theme, the topic for our colloquium is the status of theology in the contemporary academy. So I just wanted to ask, first of all, how many of you have done all the preliminary reading and listened to all of the podcasts and the pre-recorded lectures? Okay, great. Okay, that's good. That's encouraging. I think about 50%, which is good. Hopefully, you've had a chance at least to listen to some of the podcasts, which is really the main part, the plenary sessions for this colloquium. So we're addressing the theme of the status of theology in the academy today, and I wanted to welcome to Azar, by the way. Greetings to Azar, joining us all the way from Israel, from Nazareth. Greetings. I should say as well that there will hopefully be time, we'll try to set aside time during the break for you to get to know each other a little bit, and especially for the research students to catch up. But I'd like to begin this first session with a quiz. So I'm going to share my screen with you in just a moment, if I can bring up the right PowerPoint slide. Can everyone see this screen? It should say the status of theology in the academy today. You can all see that. Great. So you can see the basic structure of this first session. So we're going to start with a quiz. The introduction was pre-recorded, so this was uploaded onto Moodle, so hopefully you've been able to see that short video. And then Zoltan and I did a podcast discussion on this first part of the session, from Queen to Court Gesture, and we were narrating the story about how theology became downgraded or marginalized in the Western Academy. And then we did another podcast, didn't we, Zoltan, about the marginalization of theology and the emergence and the growth and development of liberal theology and Schleiermacher. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to view that recording, to listen to that podcast, which sets us up nicely for part 3, which is going to be part of the live session later on today. So I'm going to share a few thoughts with you on that a bit later, and then open the theme up for discussion. So and then there'll be a brief conclusion. So let's begin first of all with this quiz. I was thinking about fancy ways of doing this and splitting people into discussion groups and breakout groups and all that sort of thing. It was just going to be too much hassle. So what I suggest that we do is, if you think you know the answer to any of the questions, just I think probably the best thing is to just raise your hands. I've got some of you on my screen, and I'll try to see who answers. Okay, and the prize for winning the quiz is honor and glory. So no actual prize, but it's just interesting to open up this theme for discussion. Okay, so question 1. Approximately how many students are currently enrolled on a program in theology and religious studies in UK higher education at both public and private higher education providers in the UK? Does anyone know the answer to this? Is it A, 25,000, B, 20,000, C, 10,000, or D, 5,000? What do you think?
A.
Who was that? Selena?
No.
A.
No? Okay. A. Okay, so Peterson thinks A.
D, sorry.
D. Okay. So
Yeah, I said D.
Peterson thinks it's D. Does anyone agree or disagree?
Yeah, I'll agree with D. I mean, we are very, very special.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't even know how many students there are enrolled in any program. So without that knowledge, I wouldn't know what proportion of them might be doing theology. But I think it's quite popular. I'm going to go for A.
Okay. Okay. So it's either A or D, is it? Well, unfortunately, you're all wrong.
C.
It is actually the correct answer is C. It's approximately.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Charmaine, if you called the answer. Yeah. But, well done. Well done to anyone, to Charmaine and whoever else got that one right. Okay. So question 2, according to a 2017-18 report on theology and religious studies provision in the UK higher education, what percentage of theology undergraduates were female?
Yeah, that's high.
B.
That's high.
B.
I'd say C. C.
Okay, Selena thinks C.
C, I would say C.
Peterson is
A.
saying no. Peterson's saying A. Azza, you're saying C.
C, yes.
It was C last time, so I reckon it won't be C again.
Okay. That's Robin's
It's
logic.
B. Charmaine says B.
I'm heading for D.
Well,
Okay.
judging by the cohort at Spurgeon's, it's not that many, is it?
No.
Yeah,
or B?
Spurgeon's might not be representative of
It might not.
higher
No, I don't
education.
think it is.
I'll put you out of your misery, and tell you that the correct answer is C. So well
Yes.
Oh,
done. You said
trend.
4%, so slightly more than half of students are theology and religious studies students are female, at least at undergraduate level. But what about?
Sorry. Before we go on, I've just Googled it and checked how many people are studying mathematics, so that we can compare with theology, and it's between 40 and 50,000 year by year.
And maths isn't very popular, is it?
Changing slightly, but between 40 and 50,000. So 4 or 5 times more than theology.
So it's more popular than theology. What a scandal!
And I deliberately Googled mathematics because I think that is not the most popular subject.
Yes, you know what butterflies study at university, don't you?
How to fly.
Mathematics.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Joshua, could you put this on full screen, the slides?
I could, Rosie, but the problem is that I wouldn't be able to see who is who's
That's
answering.
fine.
I've got you all as little thumbnails on my screen. So hopefully you'll be able to at least see it. Can you see the
I can see it. Yeah.
Okay, so question 3 is what percentage of doctoral students in theology and religious studies were female?
I think that's quite low.
What do you think?
B.
C
I would
again.
say B.
I'd say B.
It's been C the last 2 times.
Yeah.
B.
I would say B also.
Okay, so you think B, there seems to be a consensus on this, and you are actually all correct. This is the correct answer.
It's lower.
So it's lower for some reason. So perhaps master's students, I'm looking at some of you on my screen, you can make a contribution to to bringing this up closer to 50%. So hopefully some of you that I'm looking at right now, not to mention any names, will consider doctoral studies in theology. That would be great.
Joshua, can I ask a clarification question?
Yeah.
This is including seminaries. This isn't just the secular academy.
This is public and private institutions in higher education. So any accredited institution, whether it's a seminary or a college or a university. So
Right.
I think it's all accredited higher education, Robin, in religious studies. Yeah.
Just if I just may add one thing, as a general rule, the higher you go in the hierarchy, the less women you find,
Yeah,
the less
that's true.
females you
Question.
find
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
In which case I go for A for this one.
I'd go for A.
A question
Yeah.
4. So what percentage of academic staff on theology faculties in the UK is female?
Yeah, I'd say A.
A?
Yeah.
C.
A.
Ooh.
Yeah, who said C? Well
Me.
done, Chengeto, you are correct.
Oh,
It's 34%.
Well.
That's correct, well done. And interestingly, by contrast with other humanities, so the humanities in general, this is for theology and religious studies, 34% female faculty. But for the humanities in general, the percentage of females on faculties is 53%. So again, there are issues here with theology that need to be addressed. Question 5. What is the average age of theology lecturers in higher education institutions in the UK? And again, Spurgeon's College isn't necessarily representative in this
I'd
case.
say C.
I'll
C.
go for D.
No, I'm going to say D.
I'll go for D.
D.
Okay, so we're wavering between C and D.
C and D.
Yeah, okay. So is it, are we going to do 50-50 or phone a friend or ask the audience?
Ask the audience.
Ask the audience. Okay. So what's the final answer?
C.
C. I'd say C.
D.
C.
Okay, C is correct.
Yay.
Wow.
You've just won absolutely nothing. So okay. Right. Question 6. This is an interesting one. What percentage of students of theology and religious studies find employment as clergy? What would you say?
Probably C.
It's always C.
C.
it's always C.
Yeah, go for C again.
Yeah, C.
C?
C.
But no, I think might be D.
Ooh, crazy.
Yeah. No, surprisingly, it's actually B.
Ooh.
Oh.
Yeah. So only 1 in 10.
What do the rest do?
Who knows?
Because it's not the most obviously employable degree, is it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think quite a few go into charities, teaching professions, that sort of thing.
Youth workers.
Youth
Yeah.
workers, yeah.
Do they not count as clergy? Yeah.
Maybe not. Okay, what about question 7? What percentage of UK undergraduates go on to pursue postgraduate studies in theology and religious studies? So obviously, in your case, it's 100%. But generally speaking.
B.
A.
A.
No, I think A.
C.
A.
I think I'll go for D.
Okay. Who said B?
Charmaine.
Charmaine and Crispin. Well done. You get the gold star for this
Very
question.
good. Joshua, do you know how that compares to other subjects?
I don't, Robin. I don't. No doubt the statistics will be available.
Quick, Zoltan.
Yeah. Okay. Question 8. So this is a more general question here. So that we're talking about the UK, the British population. According to a YouGov poll, what percentage of the British population do not regard themselves as belonging to any particular religion?
Religious nuns.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So people who don't consider themselves Christian, Muslim,
Go for B.
Yeah, B, I think.
Jedi, or whatever the other categories are.
B.
It's
Yeah,
certainly,
probably
certainly
B.
rising, particularly among younger people.
I think C.
Yeah, okay. So some people have said B, some people have said C. Any other guesses?
Could even be higher.
C.
Could even be higher.
Well, I'm sorry to say that you're all wrong.
No, it's A.
The correct answer is
D.
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 Whoa.
Is it?
I did say D.
Yeah, I did as well. I did some research on this
Yeah, I thought
for
it could be
previously.
higher.
Schools. I
don't
did
belong to
research
any
on
particular-
school and I asked kids, and over 50% said no religion.
Yeah, that's right. And what I want to ask you, this is quite an international gathering here today at this colloquium. I can see people from Canada, from the USA, from Sweden, from Hong Kong, from Israel. Apologies if I've missed anyone out. But are any of you from countries or nations where this figure might be even higher? Bengt, what about Sweden? You might not know the precise figures, but I suspect it might be even higher than 50%.
It's very secular in public, but I think it's around 60. But
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, Israel, Asa, is going to be a lot higher.
Yeah, I mean, no, in Israel, I mean, when you speak about Israel, of course, there's three groups of people. The Muslims, I mean, we all are born into a religion. This is the problem in the country here. That you need to be part of a religion. It's that we have an increasing number of people that don't see themselves belong to a religion, but the percentage is very little so far.
It's a nominal affiliation.
Yeah, nominal, yes.
Good. Let's move on to question number 9. So, what percentage of the British population regard themselves? So, according to the same survey, the percentage of British population regard themselves as very religious. What do you think? Is it 3%, 6%, 15%, or 28%?
B.
15. C.
Say C.
B.
B.
Okay, so
C.
I've heard B, C, and D, and unfortunately, you're all wrong.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're just depressing us, Joshua.
I know it's quite depressing, but it's just an indication of the formidable challenges.
Uphill.
Yeah, that we need to be, we need to define the reality and be realistic about the.
Yeah.
So yes, the answer is A, 3%. And sorry if there are any Anglicans here to make you feel even more depressed. But this is another quite gloomy statistic, quite alarming statistic. Question 10, what percentage of young people aged 18 to 24 in the UK regard themselves as Anglican?
A.
What percent is it? 3%, 5%, or 10%?
A.
1% A.
A? Okay, I think I've done a good job in managing your expectations very low. The correct answer is actually 3%. So,
Oh, hooray!
so get the champagne out.
Yeah, come on, that 3%, we've nailed it. We're done now, no work to do.
So 3%. So although it's not 1%, and we can be glad about that, it is still 3%, which is a tiny and dwindling and sadly decreasing minority. So these are just some questions to introduce us to the theme, and also, as I indicated, to just remind us of some of the really formidable challenges that we currently face as theologians today, because I consider you all to be theologians, whether you're working full-time in a seminary or a university or whatever. You're all theologians, and indeed many of you are, perhaps you have aspirations to become a theology lecturer, and perhaps there are even some of you who are currently teaching theology right now. So everyone apart from Zoltan, who obviously falls into this category, me and Zoltan, but anyone else, is anyone else on the screen right now currently engaged in teaching theology in a college or a university or seminary setting?
Yes.
Yeah. Could we just have a hands? Yeah. So 1, 2. Okay. So just 2 of you. I thought it might be a couple more than that. but one or two of you. Oh, Robin as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so Robin, Alistair, and Azza. And who among you has aspirations to become a theology tutor or lecturer? Yeah, great. Okay, excellent. Joseph, Crispin, Marion. Yeah, excellent. Peterson, one or two others. Good. Okay, so that's encouraging. So hopefully this theme about the status of theology in the academy will give us all plenty of food for thought and reflection on this important topic. So we're going to begin the next part of the presentation, which is actually part 3, but I'll just go quickly. I'll continue to share the screen, but I'm just going to minimize the thumbnails of you. So apologies if I can't see you. If you want to interrupt or make an intervention, it won't work just to raise your hand because I won't be able to see you, but do feel free to speak. Take yourself off mute or whatever. So we're beginning the next part of the presentation now. So I've uploaded a pre-recorded video just introducing the theme and the topic. So hopefully you'll have had access to that. And then Zoltan and I did a podcast where we spoke about the decline or the downgrading, the marginalization of theology ever since the Enlightenment. And then there was another podcast where we discussed the growth, the emergence of liberal theology in the academy, and the growth of religious studies, and that it became possible for the first time to study theology without having any kind of faith commitment. So there's an important difference or distinction to be made between theology and religious studies. And then there were some questions for discussion. Perhaps we can come back to that on the basis of part 1. And then theology. So part 2, Zoltan and I did what ended up being quite a lengthy podcast discussion. I think Zoltan and I had intended to speak for about 20 minutes. We ended up speaking for about 45 minutes. But hopefully at least some of you will have had an opportunity to have eavesdropped in on that discussion where we spoke about these themes, these issues, the devaluation of truth, what it means to be a theologian, what it means to be even a Christian in a very secular society, in a post-truth or post-Christian world. So we discussed some of those issues together. And we mentioned this distinguished theologian, philosopher Dallas Willard, who you can see on the screen, and reflected on some of his thoughts and ideas about the decline of truth in the contemporary theological academy. And also I offered some reflections on this verse from Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. And then I was put in my place by Zoltan, an Old Testament scholar who rightly criticized me for taking this quote out of context. So you can listen to the podcast if you want to listen to that debate and discussion. So there were some more discussion questions. We might come back to those. But this brings us to part 3 of the presentation, where I want to offer some normative proposals for addressing and overcoming the marginalization of theology in the contemporary academy. So everything that we've said so far has led up to this. So in part 1, we discussed the descriptive task, describing the current state of play. And then in part 2, we tried to do the analytical or interpretive task, applying some of the insights from part 1 towards the elucidation of the current status of theology in the academy today. And this brings us nicely into the normative part of the presentation, where we can discuss some positive proposals. Now, I want to say from the outset a brief caveat that I'm going to deliberately make some quite provocative black and white statements in the hope of provoking a discussion so that we can think and reflect about these issues for ourselves. So my question in this part 3, is what do theologians need to do? So when I talk about theologians, I'm talking about us, you. What do we need to do to assert the relevance and necessity of theology in the academy today? So that's our guiding question for this part 3. So I would like to ask the question about how secular materialism, which Zoltan and I spoke about in part 2, how did this ideology become so constitutive of people's worldview and people's identity? And the question that I like to ask is, why has secular materialism become so dominant in our culture, in our society? It dominates not just our academic culture, but also popular culture. Secular materialism is the dominant hegemonic worldview of our times, at least in the post-Christian West.
Yeah.
But the question is, who was it who proved that reality was an entirely secular phenomenon? Because if someone knows, then please tell me, because I'd love to know the name of the scientist or the philosopher or the sociologist who proved beyond doubt that reality was a secular phenomenon. And I'd like to know when this so-called fact was established conclusively. Because of course, no one in history has ever established scientifically or rationally that that reality is essentially secular. And despite all the developments in modern thought, in philosophy, in psychology, even in religious studies, in science, none of these developments have shown that the substance of Christian faith is rationalist. And I think this is a prevailing myth of our intellectual and academic life, that this has been demonstrated. It hasn't. And perhaps I would even go so far as to use polemical language and say that it's a lie, or at least it's an unexamined assumption or a dogmatic assertion. It's become almost an article of faith that is preached by the high priests of atheism in our society today. I'm thinking of high-profile figures like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and others. But behind them are legions of minions who ascribe to this worldview.
Joshua, can
Yes.
I just
Robin?
Can I pause you for a second? Can I just secular? The term secular is a contested term.
Mm-hmm.
So Charles Taylor talks about 3 kind of definitions of secular. Can I just ask you which one you're using when you're talking about who is it who proved that reality was a secular phenomenon? You know, what exactly are you meaning when you say that?
Yeah, it's a fair question, Robin. We will come on to Charles Taylor in just a moment. But there are lots of different contested definitions of secularism. You're right. The way that I'm using it is not in terms of a pluralistic worldview or a level playing field for all religions. I'm using it in connection or in conjunction with the worldview of materialism, which disavows the reality of non-visible things. So if you can't see it, if you can't perceive it, then it can't be real. This is essentially the worldview of secular materialism. So spiritual realities of life and consciousness and even reality itself can be reduced to visible categories or to biological processes. So consciousness, for example, is regarded as a byproduct of a simple byproduct of electrochemical signals produced by the brain. This is the essentially the secular worldview. So that's the kind of context within which I'm using this term. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So, but thanks. It's a good point for clarification. So, according to the secular ideology, any aspect of life that can't be explained according to biological laws and principles is excluded from the domain of reality. And I would say that the picture of the world as presented by secular materialism doesn't include the fullness of reality, because it excludes subjectivity, it excludes conscience, it excludes spirituality from the domain of reality. And so the life of God, we speak as theologians about this unfathomable mystery of spiritual reality. The reality of God can't be explained in terms of objectivized science. So we can't study God as an object of our knowledge, because if God were to become an object of our understanding, God would be less than God. If we can put it in those terms. So we can't study God in the same way that a biologist studies a plant or an insect. These categories simply don't apply. The tragedy, I think, of the contemporary world, again to use quite polemical language, intentionally to provoke a response, but I would argue that the tragedy of the modern world consists in its unthinking rejection of the reality of spiritual things. This naive faith in the material reality of material things and objects. And I think this is not just a metaphysical debate about, what is the nature of reality. It's not an abstract discussion, because it connects with our real lives and experiences as human beings, as well as followers of the risen Christ in the world today, as theologians. Mm-hmm. And I think this uncritical repudiation of the things of the spirit creates an atmosphere of nihilism, or the belief in nothingness, which pervades every aspect of public life today, especially in the domain of politics and religion. And this naive faith in the absolute reality of the material world is not subjected to doubt or critical scrutiny. And I would argue that materialism is based just as much on faith as is a theological worldview, the worldview of the Gospels, because it's philosophically impossible to prove the objective existence of physical things, of matter. Philosophically, it's impossible to prove. Philosophers have been trying to do it ever since the time of Plato, over 2,000 years ago, all the way through to Descartes, right through to contemporary neuroscientists and philosophers. They haven't been able to prove the objective existence of matter. And so secular materialism admits of the reality only of visible things, of stuff and of matter. And I think that, and I acknowledge that this is just my perspective, but I think that the most valuable contribution that theology can make to the contemporary world is to expose the nihilistic and irrational assumptions of secular materialism, so that we can begin to deconstruct some of the dogmas that are so prevalent in our academy, in our society, in our world, and even, dare I say, controversially, in our churches. there's this tendency among prominent thinkers today to reduce reality to its lowest common biological denominator. So Zoltan and I discussed in the first part of this session, we discussed the marginalization of theology. Theology used to be the queen of the sciences. And since then, it's become more like the court jester or an esoteric academic pursuit that's not worthwhile. Now, I would argue that biology today occupies a similar status in the intellectual academy as theology used to occupy in the Middle Ages. Biology is, the biological sciences occupy this very exalted position in the public estimation. So biology is the queen of the sciences today.
Joshua?
Yes.
Can I come back on some of that? Is that all right? Because I know you're being provocative, but it just sounds like what you're saying is about 60 years out of date. That actually, one of the aspects of postmodern culture is, as well as truth, is actually about power, and the deinstitutionalization of knowledge in the academy. And actually, when we talk about religious nuns, which are so high, that doesn't actually mean that they are secular materialists. In fact, a lot of them are very superstitious, and the rise of kind of vague spirituality is very high. And so we see things like the anti-vax movement, and the work of Andrew Wakefield, who's now discredited on that. In that sense, I'm not sure it's quite as dominant as it was, and that people like Richard Dawkins have a few fans, but they're nowhere near the kind of behemoths of popular culture that they were 50 years ago.
Yeah, there is something, I think, to what you say, Robin. I can understand where you're coming from. I think it is an important point. And I think we do need to distinguish between religion on the one hand and spirituality on the other. So religious adherence, as we have already discussed, is on its way out. It's on the decline. But there are certain pockets of spirituality today. But I think that the underlying point is still valid. And I don't think it is all that far out of date. A lot of this, a lot of the research on which I've based this presentation is based on some very recent surveys and research, empirical research that's been published on attitudes of the general population and among people within the academy concerning, what is reality and what is the place of spirituality in contemporary life and in contemporary academic research. And there is still the sense in which spirituality is regarded as something that is fringe and marginal and esoteric. A lot of what I say about the exalted status of biology is based on my reading of this book here. I don't know if you can see me or see the screen, or even in thumbnail, but this is the Sapiens trilogy by Yuval Noah Harari, which is an absolutely fascinating. It gives an absolutely fascinating, very lucid depiction of the contemporary human condition. And despite all of his, and it is a bestseller, by the way, it's quite popular, but also quite academic, but it's become a #1 bestseller, non-fiction, for, broken all kinds of records, translated into about 30 different languages. What I find fascinating about Sapiens is that despite all of the author's sympathy with spirituality and an understanding that there's more to life than what presents itself to our five senses. For all of that sympathy that he has, his position is essentially one of biological reductionism and a denial of the empirical reality of God, or indeed of anything transcendent. It is essentially he's representing a materialistic worldview, and he's certainly not alone in that conviction.
I just think, having done various studies of Gen Y and Gen Z, actually, I think that's much more of a Gen X and Boomer approach. I think the millennials and particularly Gen Z, there does seem to be a trend. Actually, what's interesting about some of the Gen Z research is that there seems to be an increasing confidence in institutions and kind of religious institutions, where Gen Y was a more vague spirituality. So I just wonder if it needs to be broken down a little bit more into generational thinking.
Yeah, you might be right, Robin. I suppose that Gen X, or even still the baby boomer generation, is very dominant in society and in the academy, even if the average age of lecturers in theology faculties is 47. Does that make them Generation Xers, or does that push them into whatever the other category is? I'm not sure. But I'm not sure. But people do speak, I think, quite glibly and optimistically about the spirituality of the emerging Generation Y. But I'm a little bit more cautious. Maybe it's just because I'm glass half empty perspective, but I am cautious about sugary optimism concerning the future, about this spiritual awakening that is impending with Generation Y once they begin to occupy powerful positions. But people have different views and perspectives on that, which is understandable. Let's just conclude what we have to say. I want to leave some time towards the end. Want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for Zoltan's lecture, but I also want to give you a break as well. We've been speaking now for about an hour, so I think maybe even for health and safety reasons, I probably need to give you a screen break right now. So why don't you just go and put the kettle on, or do what you need to do, and then we'll reconvene in about 3 minutes. Is that okay? Yeah, 3 minutes. Okay, see you soon. Bye for now. Okay, is everyone back? Has the kettle boiled?
Some of us are back.
Okay. I'll just give another 30 seconds or so.
Joshua, I really like that questionnaire in the beginning with those questions because it taught me that I'm a completely average person. because I am 47, and as you taught us, the average age of theology tutors is exactly 47. So I must be really average.
You shouldn't have told us your age, Zoltan. We all thought you were 37. Yeah.
I won't mention which one of those I am then.
Yeah.
3 minutes was only long enough to put the kettle on. It wasn't long enough to make anything.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry, Rosie. You want to pop out and put
No,
your...
I've left it in the hands of the computer developer, and I'll see if anything appears.
Oh, right.
But
Okay.
he's in the middle of some big, I don't know, thing going on. But hopefully he'll be able to do something.
Delegated the task.
Delegated the task, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Who's drinking coffee? Got any coffee drinkers?
It will be when it arrives.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The trouble with coffee is that it's not everyone's cup of tea. Yeah.
Drinking pure water.
Oh, water, nice and healthy. Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, I think that's most folks back now. So let's just resume. So Robin helpfully mentioned a work by Charles Taylor, which is this book here. Despite appearances, it's not actually a Bible. It's Charles Taylor's book, Secular Age. It's very big, very long, very thick. And actually, one of the advantages of lockdown, I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but it's given an opportunity to actually do that rarest of things and sit down and read a book, you know, from cover to cover. And so I've actually had this opportunity. I've dipped into it before, but I've not really had an opportunity to actually read the book. So it's been fascinating to discover it, and I would recommend it to you. If you'd like to explore these issues in more depth, in more detail, the book is called A Secular Age, which provides a very comprehensive definition of secularism and materialism. And what caught my attention was one of the chapters in Taylor's book that narrates the decline of Christianity and describes how I think with real insight, he describes how the decline of Christianity in the Western world occurred in tandem with the growth of what he calls naturalistic secularism, which is essentially synonymous with the kind of secularism that I have been describing. Taylor explains how Christianity once served as a bulwark against materialism and naturalistic reductionism. And once theology started to decline, this bulwark was removed from within the academy, and this began to filter out into the wider society. So let's just continue. There are some questions for discussion from part 3, which we'll return to in just a moment. But I just want to conclude with some summary remarks. So where does this all leave? Pardon me. Where does this all leave theology today? A question perhaps that we can discuss together or think about is, you know, should we as theologians, should we regard our discipline as a science? And if we do want to consider ourselves as in some sense as scientists, then we need to enter the scientific community recognizing that within the scientific academy there are certain rules, there's an ethos, and there are categories and criteria of truth and rationality, many of which might not be reconcilable with a theological worldview. So we need to be ready to confirm our claims to truth in an appropriate language. We need to demonstrate the explanatory power of Scripture and of Christian doctrine. And we can't do this dogmatically. We can't simply make dogmatic assertions, or we can't speak in the language of authority or unilateral top-down imperialism. We need to use the language of discussion and debate, and to enter into dialogue with other disciplines. And I think that what I've described in my other book, my most recent book, which is Theology After Christendom, in one of the chapters, I have used this concept of dual accountability, which is required of theologians today. So we're accountable to the university in terms of our intellectual competence and our academic integrity, but we also have another accountability. We have an accountability to the church, to the body of Christ, to the people of God, in terms of loyalty to our own faith experience and fidelity to, or adherence to, the teaching of Scripture and Christian tradition. And ultimately, the context of this dual accountability to the academy and to the church is held together in an overriding accountability to God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So we establish our status in the contemporary academy today by demonstrating high standards of professional knowledge and skill. We serve the church by representing the teachings of the church and imparting the knowledge of the Christian faith to the academic world. And we can articulate our experience of faith in a form of theoretical knowledge that is understandable and useful to other disciplines within the academy. So we as theologians today, at least in the Western world, we no longer speak from a position of power or even of trust, but we need to, so this means that we need to defend our faith convictions in the language of debate and dialogue and mutual respect. So theology in a post-Christian age, theology loses its status within the academy, but this isn't a cue for lament. It's not necessarily a cause for despair, even though we can't expect our Christian beliefs to be taken as accepted or even as respected in the wider academy. So I think what is essential for theologians today is to demonstrate our ability to compete within a professional academic environment. And I think that as well as our academic achievements, we can also demonstrate Christian qualities of character to represent Christ within the academy through the virtues of humility, integrity, respect, tolerance, compassion. The list could go on and on. And I think we also need to be open to new voices within the church. I'm speaking especially to those in the UK today, but it might be applicable to other contexts as well. We need to be open to new voices, to voices which have been marginalized for various social and historical reasons. So, for example, I find it remarkable and deeply lamentable the fact that the growth and the contribution of Black Christianity in the UK today has largely gone unnoticed by the predominantly white academy, at least in the UK today. I've enjoyed reading, or really been challenged from reading the works of leading black British theologians today, people like Anthony Reddy and Robert Beckford. I was reading a book by Beckford recently, and he said that, and I quote, he says, the idea of black people being fully human is a relatively new idea in Western thought. And I just thought, what a shocking indictment, and what a shocking indictment it is on contemporary academic theology today, that black voices continue to be marginalized. So on the one hand, the assumption is that we have theology, which is predominantly the theology of, to use the caricature, dead white Germans on the one hand, and this is considered to be the normative theology. And then we have all these other different kinds of esoteric theologies. So I think we need to re-envision what theology is all about, to listen to voices which have been unjustly marginalized in the history of theology. And actually, this will be to the benefit of theology, to theologians in general, because I think some of the most creative and cutting-edge work that's being done today in British theology is being done by black theologians. And if you want to find real life and vitality and real depth of biblical and theological insight, then personally speaking, I wouldn't read the works of the Dons at Oxford and Cambridge. No doubt that there's good work being done there. But if I really wanted to look for cutting edge, new insights, then I'd look to the marginal places. And I just finally like to leave you with an image or a metaphor, which actually comes from Robert Beckford, who I referred to earlier. He describes the role of theology in the world today in terms of this metaphor. He says that theology should serve two purposes. Theology should be both a bridge on the one hand and a weapon. A bridge and a weapon. So theology is a bridge because it links the church to the academy and ensures that there's dialogue and cross-fertilization between the church and the academy, that each is learning from each other. So theology is a bridge. But theology is also a weapon, because theology should assume a prophetic mandate to address real-life issues that confront us, including issues that might occasionally disturb and discomfort us. So I think this is my final word. I think this is what theology needs today. We've got a little bit of time just to put you into breakout groups on Zoom, and I just want you to get to know each other first of all, if you haven't met the person that you're going to be paired up with, but also just to ask yourself, just to reflect on some of these themes and topics and how it applies to your own life and to your own ministry, whether you're working in a church, whether you're studying theology, which is all of you, or whether you're teaching theology. So how does all of this apply? How does it become real to you, so it's not just an academic idea? And you might want to use these questions as a basic framework, as a guide. So questions from part 3. For those of you who've done the preliminary reading, to what extent do you agree with Robert Montgomery's conclusion that theology, as the most comprehensive discipline, needs to make use of secular methodologies to gain an understanding of God's creation, and especially of human life and history? The next question, to what extent do you employ methodologies from other disciplines, such as philosophy, etc., in your own research? And finally, how might it help your own theological research to envision theology in terms of, quote unquote, a science of the Spirit? Okay, so I'm going to put you into breakout groups, and you have an opportunity to discuss these questions with the people that you're paired up with. And while you're doing that, I'm going to have a look at the chat just to see if there are any questions that have come through, and then we can return to the plenary session and have a further debate and discussion. So I'm going to put you into the breakout rooms right now. So we've got 22 students. I'm going to put you into 5 breakout rooms. Okay, so I think you'll have to accept. You have to click something when you go to the rooms.
You probably want to switch off the recording as well.
Oh yes, yeah. Thanks, Rosie. I will do. I'll do that. Yeah.
There was.
Sorry, Ben.
That's all right.
Button.
I think alongside that, the need to speak the same methodology so that we can be part of the academy, I think there's also a concern that in doing so, we don't reduce what we talk about to that which can be measured.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't lose the sense of striving to talk about the unknowable, striving to talk about the mystery, in order to become part of the category. So that's the wonder and awe, that the mystery of God doesn't get lost in that discussion. We also reflected a little bit at the end on the discussion you had with Robin, and as a former biochemist, I was interested by your choice of biology as you like, as the dominant voice. For me, it was probably in biological spheres. Certainly, when I was at university, that sense of the observed and the known and evolution and all those things that seem to used to speak against theology is there. I can appreciate that, but from my mind, physics has become one of the dominant voices popularly, as well as maybe in the academy. And I think there we do see a return to reaching out for the unknowable, that sense of spirituality, with chaos theory and some of these other things that can't be pinned down. And I was commenting just as we were cut off that one of the clearest pictures of worship I've seen over the last few years has been that of Brian Cox on TV, full of awe and wonder of the physics of the universe, yet not quite knowing where to direct that awe and wonder.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to say, and now as theology, we can give you a home for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really really perceptive comment there, Ben. I think you're absolutely right to mention physics and the exalted status of physics, not just in the academy, but in the popular imagination today, in the minds of the general television viewing population, thanks to people like Brian Cox. But the thing is that although Brian Cox is open to mystery, as by the way is Richard Dawkins, some of the most even moving passages of Dawkins's book, The God Delusion and The Blind Watchmaker especially, and I've been reading some of Brian Cox's works on cosmology just recently, that yes, he is open to mystery and transcendence, but he is essentially still a biological reductionist when it comes to his scientific worldview. And actually in the case of Brian Cox, a very outspoken atheist. So I think these are still the the formidable issues that even among people who are open to spirituality and transcendence and the cosmic mysteries, there is this stumbling block of faith and certainly of the gospel in Christianity, and how we deal with that. I think it's a question that we can debate and discuss together. But it's a really good and pertinent comment. Okay, thank you I'm going to call it Ben's group now. So thanks to that group. The second group, Charmaine, I hope you don't get upset if I call it Charmaine's group. This doesn't mean you have to be the spokesperson, but it's Charmaine, Crispin, Nathan, Rosie, and Selamowit. So if you have Forgive my pronunciation. I will learn to say your name correctly. I promise. Did any of you have any thoughts on these questions? Perhaps responding to Ben, or perhaps you had your own discussions.
I nominate Rosie.
I nominate Crispin. Can we do that? To be honest, as I ought to speak the truth, we spent most of our time introducing ourselves and catching up.
That's fine.
But we did say, with regards to the extent that we employ methodologies from other disciplines question, we did all agree that in order to study anything, you have to bring in other things. So we were looking back with fondness to essays we'd written about, particularly we were talking about Romans essays and saying how we brought all sorts of other things in. And we were also looking forward with anticipation to our dissertations.
Ah, yes, something to look forward to. Yeah.
And those that have not yet started were, I'm sure, full of anticipation and excitement for everything.
Great. Okay. No, I'm glad. That's what happens when you put the cohort of master students together. But I actually eavesdropped in on your conversation. I know that you were having an erudite discussion too. You weren't just catching up and asking about the weather.
Well, a bit like when I used to do French at school, and the teacher would listen in the language lab in those days. I think you just caught us on a good bit.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, thank you to that group. Breakout room 3 was Alistair, Selena, and someone called Galaxy A20. AKA Marion, I think. Okay, so Alistair's group, who would like to share some of your thoughts and discussions?
Well, I mean, it was very helpful. We agreed that looking at Will had a science background and shared about a really interesting encounter he'd had with a chemist who talked about the value of integrating and getting the best of all the disciplines together as being his own personal methodology, and that was seen as an ideal that we should follow. Selena was talking about the fact that we do all use different methodologies in our different spheres of life. Mm-hmm. I think Marianne has said something, forgive me Marianne, I haven't quite got it right, but something along the lines that it's a real benefit in different areas of life to use different sources of information. I probably haven't done you justice there, I'm afraid. And then I think I just briefly concluded by saying that theology has an advantage over other disciplines, and that theology has revelation, which other scientific disciplines go to discover and measure. And those are all good. One thinks about, so in Genesis, Tubal-Cain learning about metal. We think about the sort of invention of mutes, or this discovery of music. So we also think about then the revelation of Scripture and the revelation of Christ. Those are not really sources of data that are open particularly to the sciences, and therefore theology is sort of set apart to some extent.
Yes, great. Thanks, Alistair. That's an excellent summary of some of the issues, and opening out, branching out into new areas, and actually branching out into an issue that we're going to discuss after the break about the place of Scripture in the contemporary academy. And yeah, that as Christians, as theologians, we have a different epistemological point of departure. So we take revelation, the Word of God, as something that is not just worthwhile, but as authoritative, which is an assumption that wouldn't be shared by the majority of other disciplines. And actually, what's interesting is that even among theologians, there are a remarkable proportion of militant atheists who read the Bible as a kind of source for historical criticism rather than as a living revelation or a faith text. I did my undergraduate degree at Oxford University, was shocked to discover that up to 50% of the theology faculty were avowed atheists. And I just remember thinking, well, what's the point of studying theology if not from the perspective of faith? But I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I think there was one point, one moment in time in which there were more Christians on the science faculties at Oxford than there were on the theology faculties, which is quite remarkable. But thanks for raising the issue. It sounds like a good discussion. And I think we'll revisit some of these themes in the next session when Zoltan will be leading us. The next group, I'm going to call it David's group, and I am going to pick on you, David Simkin, I'm afraid, because you're the only, how can I put this in the right way? The only old timer? No, that doesn't sound right. Returning student.
Yes.
You're the only returning student. Veteran, that sounds better.
Thank you very much. Yeah, yeah.
In this group. So David, Joseph Key, and Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
David, I wonder if you could share some.
So, we were mindful that the time could run away if we spent too long introducing ourselves. So we folded into that how theology feeds into our practice. Peterson is a working pastor. Joseph is a youth pastor. I'm a lay preacher and hopefully some sort of pioneer. And then there was the fascinating thing that Key had to share, which was that some people warned her that if she studied theology, it might ruin her faith, which is a fascinating point of view. And so, yeah, so each of us talked in practical terms about what we do, but how theology informs and underpins that.
Great, yeah. Excellent, thanks, thanks, David. And I think it's an important point that you raised about whether theology edifies or destroys faith, because good theology should build up faith, shouldn't it? It should deepen and help us to develop a more refined and mature and biblically grounded faith. Because the choice confronting all of us is not whether we have a theology or not. The choice is whether we have a good theology or a bad theology. Whether we have a theology that is life-enhancing, that is based on the truth of Christ and the gospel, or by contrast, whether we have a theology that is superficial and just based on emotions, or it doesn't really have a proper biblical theological basis. So what we want to try and do at Spurgeon's College, especially with these sorts of events, we want to encourage students to develop and to nurture a deep and life-giving, life-enhancing theology that has a practical application to life and to ministry in general. So that's good, and I'm glad you had an opportunity as well to introduce yourselves to each other.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, oh, sorry, Will, I can see your hand has been raised.
Yeah, I don't know if now's the right moment. I wanted to ask a question, Joshua, on what you were saying, which I didn't disagree with, about where you think the most interesting, exciting theology is happening in the British sort of scene, not the Oxbridge colleges, but sort of more on the margins. And I wanted to ask whether what you thought the reason for that was. Is that always the case that that's the nature of a sort of a prophetic nature to theology, where it's always going to be somewhat on the margins, where it's tested and then is brought into the mainstream? Or is that a sad indictment of how theology is being done in the academy in rather a strictured sort of traditional way that might be quite sort of helpfully self-critical of academic theology in the contemporary scene? Or is it in some ways an expression of where some vibrancy in the different denominations of the church are to be found in contemporary Britain. I'm thinking of the Pentecostal churches and the Coptic church, where you know, many of the more traditional white denominations are in numerical decline. I wondered what you thought was the reason for what you were describing there, Joshua, or whether it was a combination of all of those or indeed none.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, Will. I'm dying to answer it, to be honest with you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you just to hold it for the time being. I'm just mindful of the time. I don't want to eat too much into Zoltan's session, but I think it's the kind of issue that is, you know, really core to this theme. So I hope there'll be another opportunity to raise it, either at this colloquium or you know, some other opportunity. So hold the question for now, and we'll move on to the next group if that's okay. Great. So just quickly, if we could please, the final group. This is quite an erudite group of formidable theologians. I can see here Bengt, Robin, Tim, Cole, and Zoltan. So any thoughts from you? You're all either research students or faculty members. So great expectations. Can you share with us your profound thoughts?
Shall I speak?
Say something profound.
Yeah, well, it's slightly embarrassing because we spend most of the time talking about our kids and families and stuff like that. So I think we felt like we ran out of time. However, just before the end, Zoltan started talking about how he disagreed with pretty much everything you'd said. So that was helpful. That's right, Zoltan, isn't it?
That's what, sorry? Yeah, that usually happens, so that's not a surprise. Yeah. I'm
trying to remember what your point was, Zoltan. Oh, that's right. I think the question was: is it right to our greatest task is to take apart secular materialism, and actually perhaps the place to start is not being critical, but being positive and offering a better vision. Is that fair, Zoltan?
Yeah.
No, that's fair enough, Zoltan. I think you know, what I would say is, what kind of place would Spurgeon's College be if we all thought the same things and agreed on every single point? It's sometimes said that great minds think alike. I think that's rubbish. I think that great minds think for themselves and think independently. And hopefully with the tension, and actually in the next session, I'm going to have to make myself quite vulnerable. I'm going to hand over the hosting rights to Zoltan, so he'll have the power. And he's going to be leading that session as well. And he'll have the power to mute me as well, which I'm worried about. So we can look forward to that. I think we'll have to draw a line under this particular part of the colloquium, but please just stay tuned for a second while I explain the timetable. Don't log off just yet. So you'll see that we're slightly overrunning. Zoltan and I just spoke, and we wondered if it would be okay if we shortened the coffee break to 20 minutes. So originally it was going to be half an hour, but we thought that maybe 20 minutes would be okay. You know, it's a good idea to get away from the computer screen. You know, to take a screen break, to put the kettle on, or you know, whatever you need to do. But 20 minutes we hope will be enough for that, or in fact you'll have about 22 minutes now, because we're going to start Zoltan's session just 10 minutes after schedule. So we'll begin nice and promptly. We'll reconvene at 11:10. So if you want to zoom in again at 11:09, just to make sure you know the video is working and everything else, so that we can actually start promptly at 11:10. So Thanks everyone for your attention in this first session, and we look forward to Zoltan leading the next session. So we'll see you soon. Bye for now.